Taleblu is a senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Mr. Taleblu, thanks for being with us. We know that the Houthis, like Hamas and Hezbollah, are Iranian proxies, all three launching attacks in the region. Is Iran behind those attacks, or are we looking at rogue regimes and basically monsters that Iran created that it can't control?
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you, and a very belated Happy New Year to you and your viewers. In essence, there are some places where Iran has created terror groups, Lebanese Hezbollah, the Badr Corps in Iraq, and all the Shia militias there. And there's other places where the regime, through sustained political, financial, material support, has co-opted groups, existing actors that are terrorist entities that Iran brings into this architecture it calls the axis of resistance. And examples of that is Hamas in Gaza or the Houthis in Yemen. The Houthis began firing 2 days after Iran's supreme leader, a title meant to be taken rather literally, by the way, threatened that this axis of resistance would be responding to Israel's war against Hamas in the aftermath of October 7th. Despite the Houthis first trying to strike Israel between October 19th and November 1st, Israel intercepted about 70 different projectiles, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drones. Once the Houthis couldn't penetrate that air cover, they moved to the tactic we're seeing today, which is really the Iranian maritime threat we used to see in the Persian Gulf and Strait of Hormuz, now exported to the Bab el-Mandeb Strait and the Red Sea. And the Houthis have launched about 25, 26 attacks against international civilian commercial vessels, all with the goal of driving up economic costs of this traffic to generate political risk, to have Washington put the handcuffs on Israel so that it would end its war in Gaza. So whether on land or at sea, it is Iran behind these groups trying to marshal different threats, create different risk vectors just to bail out its proxy in Gaza, which is Hamas.
So then why don't we attack Iran?
It's a great question, but at the same time, we have to look at the empirical track record. Not even the Bush administration from about 10, 15, 20 years ago now, which had an even more hawkish position than the Obama administration, the Trump administration, and the current Biden administration, refrained from an overt direct attack against the Islamic Republic. And for about a decade and a half, if not 2 decades, the U.S. intelligence community has assessed that Iran has the largest ballistic missile arsenal in the Middle East. That has grown only in terms of quantity and quality, and now its proxies in the region have many of these missiles. So in essence, if Washington, I think, was going to do something directly and overtly and conventionally, it may have done it a while ago. But now, I'm not saying the cat is out of the bag, but now we have problems establishing deterrence against the Houthis in Yemen or the Shia militias in Iraq. And I think to send a proper signal to their patron in Tehran, you have to do more than the pinprick strikes we've seen in Syria, Iraq, and now more recently, Yemen.
We saw tens of thousands of people in Yemen taking to the streets today. Other than that show of anger, that show of a demonstration, what might a Houthi response look like?
Well, it's also an excellent question. Let's just contextualize that picture. We believe it is in Sana'a. In fact, it's the same main road where the Houthis in 2022 and 2023, and in several years before that as well, showcased new military hardware they had from the Iranians and, repackaged under a different name. So this is, an outpouring of support in Houthi-controlled territory, which is important to contextualize because the Houthis were rebels that overtook that country in 2014, 2015 and control large swaths of it today. There's 2 main options for the Houthis, however, in the aftermath of this attack. Option 1 is they could continue the maritime harassment given the anti-ship missiles they still have that were not destroyed. And option number 2 is they could choose to widen the war and violate the ceasefire they have with Saudi Arabia, which is held tenuously for about 1.5 to 2 years. And that option is actually quite scary, the second option, because the Saudis had been impressing upon the Biden administration, based on Reuters reports since December of last year, to not go too hard against the Houthis, because the Saudis couldn't win militarily against the Houthis, so now they're trying to keep the genie in the bottle through this belated and extended ceasefire.
Mr. Taleblu, people in Yemen have televisions, just like people in Gaza had televisions, just like people in Beirut have televisions, and they see the destruction that war brings about. Why is it that populations in that region are so primed to want to attack a country that they know could level their country into the Stone Age?
Well, it's also another very good question, and it's about as much ideology as it is about strategy. In a place like Yemen, for instance, I'm sure if you poll the average Yemeni, which was even prior to the Saudi Houthi war, already the Arab world's poorest conflict, already the Arab world's poorest country, already a country that had major environmental issues, including drought, already a country that was highly dependent on UN aid and international humanitarian aid. So no country really covets war. People don't really, on their own as individuals, covet war, but regimes composed of people have ideologies, and sometimes they prioritize the regime ideology over the national interest or the public good. You see that sharp dissonance in a place like the Islamic Republic of Iran today, where there is a massive chasm between the state and society. The state is revolutionary and Islamist, and the society is post-revolutionary and nationalist. And sometimes these two things can't hold, which is why you see such violence from the state against society. And in other places where you've seen a groundswelling of support for the Palestinian cause in the aftermath of the Israel-Gaza war, those are places where identity politics do tend to rise to the fore, despite the changing local, social, or economic conditions.
How concerned are you that we could be sitting on the razor's edge, entering into a wider war in the Middle East? And how concerned are you that we may already be there?
You know, despite being a critic of the way the Biden administration has handled the Middle East, and in particular critical of the way they've handled the nuclear and regional file with the Islamic Republic of Iran, no one can say that the Biden administration in the aftermath of October 7th hasn't tried to keep the genie in the box, hasn't tried to deter Iran's regional network, and honestly hasn't tried to make a good faith effort to stop the war from widening. The honest truth is the reason the war has widened to include over 115 to 118, depending on how you count, different attacks on U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria, as well as at least those 25 to 26 international maritime harassment efforts by the Houthis in the Red Sea, is because Iran is intent on widening the war. And Iran is intent on widening the war because, in fact, they sense American risk aversion, and they sense that Israel is intent on doing what it says, which is it intends to destroy Hamas in the Gaza Strip. And because Iran has spent so much time, money, and effort supporting Hamas, it's trying to marshal its different proxies and partners across geographies in the Middle East to generate risks of a widening war to achieve its strategic end, which is to have Hamas live to fight another day so that there can be more October 7th on the back end of this conflict.
Behnam Taleblu, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Mr. Taleblu, thanks for being with us tonight.
Pleasure. Thank you.